Today's A+ question has to do with evaluating this expression that you see here. But before we evaluate this one, I want to contrast that with something that looks very similar that will give you a different answer. So this expression, though it looks very similar, will give us a different answer because it changes the way we apply the exponent. So let's get started with this first one, and then we'll see how it compares to the second one. So this first one has the opposite of 2 to the negative 3. Now, first of all, as a side note, anytime you have a number raised to a negative integer, then that's going to be equal to 1 over a to the positive integer. So we know that we can just find the reciprocal of the same number raised to the positive exponent. So to get us started on this, let's take a look at these negative exponents and turn them into positive exponents. Here we would have the opposite of 1 over 2 to the third. So that negative 3 exponent is what's making this go into the denominator. Then we're going to subtract the opposite of 1 over 2 squared. And then we're going to subtract the opposite of 1 over 2 to the first power. Notice that I have subtracting the opposite, and the exponent did not involve this negative or this negative here. Because by order of operations, before we apply the negative to the 2, we have to deal with the exponent first. So a couple things that we can do here is we can go ahead and evaluate these exponents. We would have negative 1 over 8 minus a negative 1 over 4 minus a negative 1/2. Now we can go back and we can make these subtract a negative by adding the opposite or adding a positive, and we would have negative 1/8 plus 1/4 plus 1/2. We can find a common denominator, which would be 8. So we have negative 1/8 plus 2/8 plus 4/8. And that would give us 5/8 as our final answer. Now let's take a look at what happens when we include that negative as being affected by the exponent, which is the case when we have the parentheses. Here we have negative 2 raised to the negative third power. So again, we are going to put that exponent as positive in a denominator. So we're going to say this is 1 over negative 2 to the third. And we're going to subtract. We're going to do the same thing over here. 1 over negative 2 to the second. And then we're going to subtract again, this time 1 over negative 2 to the first. So the first thing you should notice is whether or not that negative sign is still included with the exponent or not. In the first equation, it wasn't. It was left out here. And in this one, it is still with what is going to be raised to a certain power. Let's keep going. Negative 2 to the third power, or negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 is going to give us negative 8. So this fraction becomes 1 over negative 8. We're going to subtract, and now we have 1 on the top, and negative 2 squared is negative 2 times negative 2, which is a positive 4. Then we're going to subtract, and now we have 1 in the numerator again, and this time negative 2 to the first power is negative 2. So if we write this out, we have a negative 1/8 minus a 1/4. And then instead of subtracting a negative, we can add a positive. And so we have add 1/2. Again, we can find a common denominator, which would be 8. Negative 1/8 minus 2/8 plus 4/8. And if you just take those numerators, negative 1 Minus 2 is negative 3, plus 4 is a positive 1. So we have 1/8. And there you go.